Your Technology Tutor Program, Episode 9. Today's topic, 17 common questions from folks new to digital photography.
Welcome to the Your Technology Tutor Program, where you'll learn how to be more successful using personal technologies like Mac computers, iPhones and iPads, useful software, cool web tools, videotaping and editing, digital photography, and more. And now, here's the host of our program, your technology tutor, Chet Davis.
Hello and welcome to today's program. Pleased to have you along with me as together we learn to be more successful in our use of personal technology. Well, there's certainly more and more people using cameras today than ever before. Now, granted, many of these are cameras built into our mobile phones and even digital tablets. You seen people on vacation holding up their iPads to take photos? I guess it makes sense. It's still kind of awkward to me. But then this is from a guy who, and I have to confess here, about 15 years ago I said, I'm not going to need one of those cell phone things. Yeah, well, that didn't prove true, did it? All right. Well, lots of folks use digital cameras nowadays to capture family memories, vacations, time with friends, nature and landscape, and, well, even their food. So what I did is I went through a bunch of online resources, and I asked some friends who are amateur photographers who are new to digital photography. I said, what's the most burning question you have? What are things that you're less familiar with? Or maybe when you started using your digital camera that you really wondered about. And I came up with a list of 17 things that I thought were among the most common questions for folks that are getting started. Now, this is not a program designed for the high-end professional digital photographer who's been photographing for 20 years and has, $15,000 plus in camera gear. This is designed for pretty much all my programs, what I call the every person, the common individual who's looking to make the most out of today's technology tools and wants a deeper understanding, a better understanding to use them, to put them to their full power. So here we go. Question number 1. What is the best speed in an SD card? Most video cameras today use an SD card. There's a few other brands out there. Depending on the manufacturer, you might be using a memory stick duo. Older digital cameras used by and large compact flash. But it's mostly an SD card. Now, I did a whole program, it was episode number 4, the Your Technology Tutor podcast, where I dealt, and the name of the program was Everything You Needed to Know About Flashcards. And I'll give you the address for that a little bit later on. You can catch that episode still in the iTunes store. Well, I'll just give it to you now. Or you can find it on my website, yourtechnologytutor.com/4, the numeral 4, just the number, yourtechnologytutor.com / 4. And you'll have all the information from that episode, as well as the ability to play that podcast right back on my website. But, oversimplified, the best speed for an SD card, it depends on what you're shooting. If you're shooting straight-ahead photographs, a Class 6 should be more than sufficient. Class 10 photographers, for those who will be editing their program, who are editing their images, and who wish to print their photos as larger framed or mounted photographs. So you kind of, it's interesting. At the start, before you start shooting digital photos, you want to think, okay, what am I most likely going to be using this for? And if you want to do a lot of high quality editing to the photos and you're planning to print them out as enlarged images for framing in your living room, then you may want to save in RAW mode. Now, there is some compression with some of the RAW settings on some cameras to save space, but they generally take up more space on a data card. Okay, so that's the trade-off. One of the trade-offs is usually the RAW mode requires more space on your digital media. Also, it can require special computer software. Not everybody's computer can read a RAW file. And again, there are variations, but most of the contemporary cameras come with a CD or a link where you can download a viewing program. I know all the Canon cameras come with, I think it's called Canon Image Browser, that is software that lets you read and edit and manipulate and save and export and share the RAW files. Okay, so that's RAW. That's one of the three. The other two are TIFF, T-I-F-F, and JPEG, J-P-E-G. These are file formats generally very readable on most computers because they're file formats often used as well for people creating desktop publishing images, creating photos and posters and that kind of stuff. JPEG, which again is JPEG, is what we call a lossy, L-O-S-S-Y, like mossy. It's a lossy format, meaning that some of the image quality is lost. That's why the term lossy is there. The image quality is sacrificed or thrown out before the images are saved originally in the camera to save space. This gives you smaller files that are more easily stored and shared. Okay, so it makes sense depending on what you're going to do with it. Now, the third option is TIFF, T-I-F-F. And generally, TIFF is a lossless compression format. So it does not diminish the resolution when saving each time, but it is compressed. So it takes generally less space than RAW can do, RAW mode, but is generally better than JPEG in terms of preserving the original image quality. And really it's said that most people probably wouldn't be able to tell a substantial difference between a TIFF and a JPEG version of most photos, but you can tell if you have a trained eye, I would dare say maybe even a more critical eye, and it's more discernible if you view it on a larger print, or if you blow up the photo, even on your a computer monitor. If you enlarge it, you can probably tell, especially in certain regions of the photo, like where there's areas of high contrast, where there's a great deal of detail, then you can start to, especially if you're doing side-by-side comparisons. I should also be reminding you or informing you, letting you know that if you have a program on your computer that you want to do some editing, maybe you want to do collages and that kind of stuff, which is cool. You have a lot of choices today. Be aware that every time you open up a JPEG file and perform even little edits, the photo or the file that when you're done with that and you save it back, it's recompressed. So the computer program is actually uncompressing it to see and work with the image, and then recompressing it, kind of closing it up, zipping it closed again, and a little bit of quality is lost each time you edit a JPEG file. So when you click Save of a JPEG file after doing some additional work, for most every program, you are losing a little bit, tiny little bit of that image quality. Now, honestly, again, most folks probably won't be able to discern the loss, but over multiple edits, and if you intend to print an enlarged copy, this might be an issue. The takeaway is this: if you plan or need to edit the photos and you desire to end up with the highest quality image for reproduction, like in a quality book or large wall prints, use RAW mode. For smaller prints, sharing on internet, Facebook, email, sharing on your computer, seeing a slideshow on your computer, a quality JPEG setting is probably more than sufficient. All right, on to the next question. So Chet, which aspect ratio should I use? Well, first let's talk about aspect ratio. This is the ratio of a given object, in this case a photograph produced by your camera. It's a relative measurement of the width of the image compared to the height of the image. So a traditional SLR camera. Now, when I was growing up, people with a SLR camera hanging around their neck, they were a photographer. I mean, photographer with a capital P. They were serious photographers. And that's called a single lens reflex camera. They produce photos that are in the 3:2 aspect ratio. Okay? Most of the digital compact cameras produced today create images that are 4:3. So there's 3:2 or 4:3. What's important to note here is your final destination for your photos. For example, a 4:6, which is probably the most common print size and has been for years. Those of us who grew up and the families were taking all kinds of photos, most of us in our photo books have 4:6 photos. Now, if you have Polaroids, that's another story. But a 4:6 actually conforms to, which means it's compatible in the 3:2 aspect ratio. So if you're shooting on a compact camera that's 4:3, that resulting photo, if you take it and print it right out of the camera, will not fit in a 4:6 frame. That's right, it won't fit in a 4:6 frame. You would have to crop it, adjust it, prior to printing it. Now, there's no problem in that, but just need to be aware of that. Similarly, if you plan to take your photos and put them into a video slideshow and put it maybe on DVD or upload it to Vimeo or YouTube to Facebook, and you're going to share it that way to your company's website, your church's, synagogue's website, whatever, okay? Widescreen video is in a different aspect ratio known as 16:9. So now, recent digital cameras allow you to adjust the aspect ratio in your camera settings menu. So once again, before you crop your images before printing or before using them, but you should take this into account as you frame and capture your images, okay? All right, next item is ISO. And ISO is an acronym that stands for the International Standards Organization. Years ago, if you were into photography, or maybe you may remember your mom or dad or sister or brother, they may have talked about buying film with different film speeds, and it was rated at an ASA rating. Well, that's kind of an older version of this same term. ASA stands for the American Standardization Association, replaced pretty much by ISO. And ISO, though we're not really buying film anymore for our cameras, it still is a rating that's important. Both of these terms refer to the setting that tells you or allows you to set how sensitive your camera is to light. A higher ISO rating or number is more sensitive to light. So if you see something that's like 1600, that's more sensitive to light than an ISO rating of 400. Now, this means you can adjust your aperture and shutter speed to reduce the amount of light. Okay? It should be noted that higher ISO numbers, while they allow you to capture images in darker environments, also produce photographs with a noticeable grain, a grainy appearance. Okay? So, again, they'll work in a lower, if it's dark at night, maybe it's around the campfire, you still want to capture that. But the trick is you end up with this kind of a grainy look, which is also sometimes termed noise. So you hear about noise and noise reduction. Now, photographers, professional photographers, that's one of the reasons they use a tripod, even with still cameras, is that allows them to use a lower ISO number, and what they do is they keep the shutter open a longer period of time. That allows it allows more light to go in. But imagine trying to hold still while your shutter is open for seconds, and you'd get a blurry image. So if you need something to jog the brain about that, think about those beautiful photos we've seen where a photographer captures the night sky, and the blurry shot of all the the stars that are moving across the universe. Those are captured on a longer shutter speed at a very low ISO setting, so they can capture even trees and rocks next to them. So really, really cool. All right, so that's ISO. Question number 6. Often asked, what shutter speed should I use? Since we just talked about shutter speed. Well, again, the shutter speed is the amount of time that the shutter is open that allows the light into or onto the camera sensor, which captures your image. A slow shutter, there you go. A slow shutter speed is used for things like, you've seen beautiful photos of like a waterfall or a stream where it looks like the water kind of is, it all kind of meshes together, where it's not sharp. Instead, it's kind of all blurry together. Really cool looking. That's a slow shutter speed. Or you've seen a stream of cars, maybe like on the Golden Gate Bridge or in a busy city street, where you just kind of see, lines where the headlights go, and there's a blur of colors that represent the cars. Okay, that's a slow shutter speed. Now, a fast shutter speed is used sometimes to capture a clear moment of action, like a runner bolting out of the starting block at the Olympics, or a Little League player making contact with the ball her first time up at bat, Shutter speeds are measured as a fraction in terms of seconds. So most cameras will see a range between 1/2000th of a second up to like 1/30th of a second. But digital cameras, so they could fit this information on their little dials and buttons, in the menus, they've typically abbreviated this setting to only display the bottom number in the equation. So when it says a shutter speed of 30, it's representing 1/30th of a second. Now, to give you some quick ideas of, shutter settings, shutter speed relative to what you might be capturing, if someone's photographing a hummingbird, it's at the feeder at your front door, and you want to freeze the motion of its wings, you would use a shutter speed around 3,000, 1/3000th of a second. Wow. If you're capturing a photo of your family gathering, and folks are mostly still, you could capture a good photo at a shutter speed between like 500 and 1,000. All right, well, it's time for the Cool Find. Each program, I'm going to use this segment to share a cool gadget, application, or web tool that I think is particularly worthy of sharing with you. This week, it's a little gadget that's small, convenient, and very useful if you have a smartphone and you like to capture photos or video even. It's called the Slingshot, and it actually looks like a slingshot when you hold it in your hand. It's a device really that's like a cradle for your smartphone, and it has kind of built into the handle are these two little plastic legs that pull out, and the two plastic legs, when you set it on the ground, has the kind of the third leg of the tripod meaning three legs. It can sit on the ground or on a desk and hold up your camera. It's really cool. Hold up your smartphone camera. Now, this provides a more stable setting when capturing photos or videos, or maybe you want to capture a photo of yourself with a timed application. Okay, the manufacturer of the Slingshot sent me a copy to check out and review, and I've used it several times and really like it. Now, one of the benefits is that it fits pretty much any contemporary model of smartphone. It fits my iPhones perfectly well. It'll also fit most of the Androids and most other contemporary cameras. Now, you compare that with another device that is designed for the iPhone called the Glyph, which is fantastic as well. I started with the Glyph. The limitation is that the Glyph requires the camera to be out of the case to mount, and then it attaches to the tripod. It's much more solid and sturdy than the Slingshot, but it's severely limited because you have to take it out of its case if you've got it in a protective case. And it mounts to a professional tripod, even a small consumer tripod, but it doesn't come with its own built-in tripod. So the Slingshot, I find, is very convenient for a lot of casual photographers, and quite cool, You'll find the Slingshot at the manufacturer's website. That's Woxom.com, Woxom.com. The retail price of the Slingshot is $19.95, which at present includes free shipping in the continental U.S. So it's a pretty cool product. Again, that's called the Slingshot. All right, and that is this episode's Cool Find. Stay tuned each and every episode for a new cool find. Back to our topic at hand today. The topic is 17 of the most common questions asked by those new to digital photography. The next question is, what shooting mode is best? What's the best shooting mode? Well, here's what I'm talking about. On most contemporary cameras, you have a dial or a touchscreen menu where you can choose from several shooting modes. These are settings that range from manual, where you can set every available function, to assisted, where you set some of the options, but the rest are kind of automatically controlled by the camera, to programmed modes, which are all automatic but for different scenarios, to fully automatic, where the camera just has to guess, what it has to do to give you the decent, best possible photo. Now, most seasoned photographers lament the auto button. In fact, there are photography courses who tout the ability to, quote, wean amateurs and new camera owners away from the auto setting. Now, I would argue that the auto settings on today's cameras are way better and deliver much better quality results than similar settings from cameras produced even a decade ago. But really, still, when you go fully auto, you're counting. You're expecting the camera to juggle everything from the amount of available light to the color temperature and the quality of that light, to the distance to the subject, how much motion is in the shot. You're really asking it to average out, and when it averages out, you get a okay shot. It's probably not going to be a phenomenal, great shot. Might be a fine family memory, but if you're looking for a gorgeous photo, you're less likely to get it on automatic. Now, you'll more likely be satisfied with your photos if you work at understanding at least the programmed modes to capture better photos in different circumstances. Now, I'm picking up my little Sony camera. I've got a little Sony point and shoot. It's the HX9V, I should say, which has been replaced now by the HX10V. But there's a setting on that little point and shoot, that little compact camera, that has 12 programmed modes, from sports to fireworks, snow to nighttime, and each one of these settings modifies the adjustments designed to provide better photos in those specific situations. So I recommend you check your camera manual for the suggested modes given the different kind of event you might be working on, and play with it a little bit, and pick the one that's going to do better for you given your circumstances. And that's the kind of thing, go out and play one day or one evening with your camera and try some of those, and then take a look at the result. And then when it comes time to really capture those magic memories, or you're going to go out and just capture some beautiful art photos, you'll be better equipped to deliver a great looking photo. Now, two specific settings that are on pretty much every one of the compact digital cameras today, the point and shoots, even the HDSLRs. There's one setting called Aperture Priority and one called Shutter Priority. So these are two assisted modes. And what an assisted mode is, it's almost all automatic, but it allows you to manually set one thing. Aperture Priority is close to auto again, the only manual choice being that you select the aperture setting. And the aperture is modeled after the iris in the human eye. And it's the iris, call it the pupil too, right? The iris that opens and closes in different lighting situations. So when you walk into a dark home, your iris, your aperture, opens up to let more light in. If you go out to the snow slopes on a sunny day, the aperture in our eye, the iris in our eye, closes way down because there's so much light. It just needs a little bit of light to make that image. Okay, so that's what the aperture does. And in Aperture Priority, you get to manually set that, and everything else is based around that setting that you make. So one example where someone might want to use this is if you wanted to create a larger or smaller depth of field. And that's going to come into play in one of the upcoming questions, because when we have a narrow depth of field, there's only part of our image that's in focus. Whereas if we have a broad or wide, deep, large depth of field, there's more of the picture that's in focus. And oversimplified, when you zoom out to go wider, when you zoom out to show more of your image, more of everything is in focus. When we zoom in to get a close-up on something, oftentimes we have a very narrow depth of field. Okay, so that's aperture priority. The other is shutter priority. Shutter priority, again, is close to auto, but the manual choice is the selection of the shutter speed. One time for this is to select, for example, a higher shutter speed to freeze action. So, if you're capturing your father's golf swing or your mother's tennis swing, or you want to get your dog jumping in the air at the park to catch the frisbee, you'd use a higher shutter speed, and you could leave everything else on auto if it's a reasonably evenly well-lit day. Okay? So we kind of touched on depth of field, and that's question number 9. What is depth of field? I kind of got that out of order, didn't I? The depth of field is the area of acceptable focus, that part of your image, when you're pointing your camera in any direction, the part of that scene that's in focus, we call that your depth of field. That's oversimplified, but that gives you a real good handle. When you have a broad, a large depth of field, there's a lot that's in focus, the things that are near and far, left and right. When you have a small depth of field, there might just be one thing that's in focus where things in front of it or behind it are not in focus, okay? This leads us to the next couple questions. Question number 10, how can you produce sharp images? For example, okay, Chad, I got a new digital camera, and I'm noticing that some of the images are not very sharp. They're kind of blurry, okay? And I'm trying my best. What ideas do you have? Well, certainly there may be lots of reasons, like you're not getting crisp, clearly focused images on your digital camera. One way, is to make sure you're using proper shutter speed, for example. Another is called focus lock, and many digital cameras today have this. If you've got one of the newer cameras that have facial recognition, it's designed to find the faces in the photo to make sure they're in focus. There's even some of the new compact cameras I've seen and actually used that when this particular setting is adjusted, it'll take the photo for you when it detects that the people in the photo are smiling. Yikes, that's pretty scary. How 21st century is that? Total recall. One way to ensure that your subjects are in focus is this. And a lot of times people will, even if you want to be artistic and use rule of thirds and put your subject just a little bit to the left or the right of center, oftentimes the focal zone, particularly on digital cameras that are a little bit older, will be dead center. So what you do is hold the camera on your primary subject, the face of the individual, or maybe the pair of individuals that's in your picture there, and hold the shutter down part way, about halfway, and most cameras will then focus on your subject. Oftentimes they'll put like a little box around your primary subject. Okay, when they do that, they've said, okay, I'm focusing on that face, on that thing. Okay, then you can move the camera left or right, up or down to reframe the shot to put the person more artistically in there. But as long as you've kept your finger hold down a little bit, it will maintain that subject in focus, and by pressing all the way down on the shutter release, it'll capture the photo. So even our camera phones have this ability. For example, on the iPhone and the iPad, you can click on the subject to select that point in the image to lock your focus. All right, now let me throw in a little tip in addition to a question. And I picked this up from a gentleman named Darren Rouse, who's over at digitalphotographyschool.com, a great website. He shares a good idea when you're capturing photos with your digital camera, or even your standard traditional camera. It's a good idea to depress your shutter with the flat part on your finger. So not the tippy tip, and if you've got your finger angled down, it's a lot of downward pressure, okay? And it might result, especially if you're using something called burst mode, which I'll get to in just a second, you might end up capturing 5 or 8 images when you meant to just capture 1. So again, you have better control if you use the flat part of your finger to depress the camera shutter. That brings us to question next one, 11. What is burst mode? Well, now that I've introduced that setting, burst mode, which is also known as continuous shooting mode, is very common on today's digital cameras, and it allows us to capture several images instead of just one each time you depress the shutter button. My wife uses it a lot to capture our youngest son in sports. In Little League, got some great shots of the kids coming across home plate or hitting that ball, hitting that single or that home run. It is a great tool. Now, it can also be very useful in nature photography as well as capturing children, because you might get that little, capturing 6 or 8 images in a matter of 1 or 2 seconds of a child often results in a couple of really precious images beyond that cheesy posed face. So I've even read where a lot of professional portrait photographers will shoot in burst mode, especially if they're capturing children or pets, because they end up with some very comfortable candid shots when the people relax. So the first shot is kind of, they're a little bit more stoic and staged, and by the second, third, and fourth shot in, they're a little bit more relaxed and kind of having fun, and those end up being some really precious shots. All right, question next. Chet, should I use the camera's built-in flash? Well, that's a great question. Professional photographers, by and large, will use not a built-in flash that's right on the camera body. They'll get an attachment, and oftentimes, like you see a big setup for a professional, like a wedding portrait or a big family portrait or a news setup to capture, dignitaries, they'll have multiple flashes set up with umbrellas that bounce the light, so it's not a harsh light directly at the individual, and they're set off by remote control. They're oftentimes called a slave flash, so that the camera itself triggers the flash so it goes off at the right moment. But because coming right from the camera, you've got a couple things that you're fighting against. One of them is distance. If you're not relatively close to the subject, that flash isn't going to do you a squat of good, especially if it's dark. You want to be between, 2 and 3 meters close to a primary subject to have that flash really work out. And it's ideal if it's not this really harsh bright light right at the individual, because that oftentimes will lead us into red eye, okay, where you've seen you're actually seeing the light reflected off the retina of another human. So there's a variety of devices that some cameras have used where they'll flash, a couple times before the real flash, so that the subject's eyes are used to the light before capturing it, and the pupils open wide, and then it's like, whoa, what happened? Okay. Another way is if you don't have the ability to set up remote flashes, you don't have one of the flashes that have a diffusion media which spreads out the light. It's not one little bright spot of light. Some people will use their own diffusion media. Okay, so you can get some opaque media to put in front of the flash, so it allows the light to come through a good portion of the light, but it's not so harsh. All right. And I found, frankly, that the flashes on camera phones, on my iPhone, I'm really not happy with that at all. So I personally not. I know there's apps, and I've tried some of the ones. I haven't found one yet that I absolutely love. My camera phone works great in daylight and some other situations, but finding that a very strong weakness of camera phones today is, flash and indoor low lighting. All right, next item. Chet, I've seen lots of photos. How do I create the effect where the subject is in focus, but the rest of the photo is out of focus? Well, there's actually 3 different ways to do this. The first way is the one that's been used a long time by professionals, and that's managing your depth of field. When you have a narrow depth of field, or again, a small area of acceptable focus, you put your subject in that focus area and the rest of the image is out of focus. For example, someone might be relatively close to a person, and maybe it's a bride on her wedding day, and they're capturing her image in focus, and the background, maybe it's the altar with the flowers, for example, is out of focus. So that's outside of the depth of field. Okay? So that's one way, is by manually adjusting, and it's a matter of adjusting the ISO, the exposure, adjusting the shutter speed, adjusting, subject to distance ratio, how close you are, how far. All those things work together, And professionals get very good at making that happen. Now, if you're newer to photography, okay, maybe you're an amateur photographer, you don't want to spend a lot of time learning that. It's actually easy to learn, and I should have another tutorial on that on my website in the coming months. But if you're looking to make it happen, there's two ways, okay? Some of the newer cameras, for example, the little Sony compact camera I mentioned, and many of the other contemporary compact cameras I've seen in the market, have a setting automatically that will do this for you, okay? Now, you have to be less than a few feet away from your subject, but you actually select that setting on your camera, and then hold the camera there until it's in focus, and then you click the shutter button. And what it does, electronically, it does that setting for you, adjusting the depth of field relative to that subject. So there's not much guesswork. It automatically does it for you. And the result really is quite stunning. I've gotten some great images with that particular setting. Now, you can also do it in post, is what we call. What that means is you can do it in editing, when you edit your photos. Some of the software available has that kind of a filter, a mask, or feature. And if you're shooting with an iPhone, for example, or an Android phone, there are apps that will do this. I know, for example, in the Instagram app, you can use the tilt shift effect. The radial tilt shift effect will give you a beautiful depth of field effect where you can have a primary object or subject in clear focus and everything else be blurry. Very attractive, okay? Next question, just a couple more to go here. Can I attach a bigger zoom lens to my camera? Generally speaking, no. It depends on the camera. For most of the compact cameras, the answer is no. It's what we call a fixed lens. A DSLR camera or an HDSLR camera, those are the single lens reflex cameras, do have the option of replacing the lens on the camera. In fact, you can even purchase the camera body without the lens if you have your own preferred lens. Now, I should mention that there are lenses that can be added to some compact cameras to provide wide-angle, telephoto, or macro, which is like extreme close-up capabilities. But for optimum results, I would carefully research this. There are some that are what I would call gimmicky, and a lot of the people aren't really happy with the results if you are into fine photography. It might be even best to visit a local photo shop, bring your camera in and check to see what they have and take a look at the results to see if it's going to meet your needs. You can even purchase these for your digital phone camera. I have one set called the Allo Clip for my iPhone. It provides a wide angle, a 2x lens, and a macro set. It's pretty cool, but honestly, I don't use it that often. All right, getting down to our last 3 questions here. How to keep your camera clean? Well, first of all, I strongly recommend checking with the camera manufacturer recommendations for cleaning your specific model. But as a rule, it's safe to clean using a clean microfiber cloth. Those are those, tech cloths. You can get them usually in electronics stores, computer supply stores, But keep this little cloth in its own little bag. It keeps it separated and clean from other liquids or oils or, grit that can end up damaging your camera when you think you're cleaning it. And always, when cleaning the lens, first use a lens brush. You can get those as well in camera supply stores. This removes any loose particles that otherwise might scratch the surface if you try to clean them with the cloth. Then with your clean microfiber cloth or lens tissue, and you can get lens tissue at reputable camera supply stores or online, you will clean it in a circular motion. If needed, dampen your clean cloth with either clean water or lens cleaner fluid, but never, okay, this is your grandma now, never, never, never spray or drop liquid directly onto or into the lens, only on the cloth, and then apply the cloth to the lens. Now, the LCD screen on many of our cameras today, if it's an LCD screen rather than glass, you want to be very careful about that. Use either a clean microfiber cloth or, another clean tissue. Avoid pressing too firmly, because that could really damage the surface of that LCD screen. There are special kits available for this purpose. Your camera will also stay cleaner, by the way, longer, and have less opportunity for both the lens and the LCD view screen to become scratched or damaged if you stow it safely in its own case. I strongly encourage you to do that. And by the way, never use like paper towels on your lens. Even folks say use caution and don't use Kleenex facial tissue, any brand facial tissue, because it can contain even slight microfibers that are abrasive and can scratch your lens. All right. Winding our way down to our last two, how can I use the feature chat I see in photo software or on web galleries like Picasa or SmugMug? I'm looking at people's photos and it shows the location where the photo was captured. Well, this is enabled by a function in newer cameras that's called GPS, Global Positioning Satellite. Okay, you actually have to turn it on in your camera prior to using this function to be used later when viewing the photos. It's saved in what we call the metadata of the camera. Check your camera's owner's manual for the specifics. And our last question, I get asked this occasionally with people traveling a lot. Can I take my digital camera through airport security without worry? The answer is yes. The current technologies used in airport security screening pose little to no danger to damaging your digital photography gear. In fact, the sensor in your camera is not much different from the sensor in the screening equipment that receives X-rays to capture and display to the airport screening security staff. Well, that's it for today's program. Thanks so much for joining me. Links presented in today's program, along with a summary of the notes and additional information, resources that I discussed and shared with you, all of it's going to be in the show notes. You'll find out on my website, yourtechnologytutor.com, numeral 9, yourtechnologytutor.com/9. Our next program, most common computer and tech support questions. Until then, your technology tutor, Chet Davis, signing off. Have a great rest of the day.